Raise your hand if you'd prefer to feel insignificant at work.
Yeah.
Really high.
I feel one.
There are multiple generations here, right? Nobody raised their hand. Nobody said, hey, you know, I'm a Gen Xer, I'm a boomer, so I'd prefer to feel unimportant. Or those millennials, Gen Zs, they want to be seen, heard, valued. No. Because despite generational differences, there's one core need that unites us as human beings. And that is the need to feel that we matter. And today, I want to argue that what's actually getting in the way of flourishing in work and life is not a loneliness epidemic. It is not a disengagement crisis. It is not a technology addiction. It is that this fundamental need for significance isn't being met on a grand scale. We are facing a mattering deficit. That's good news, believe it or not, because our research shows you can do something about it in your next interaction. And over the next few minutes, I want to show you exactly how. But first, let me take you back to a hospital room 10 years ago when I was meeting my newborn son for the first time. And the nurse brought me over to this bassinet. And I looked down, and this tiny crying human tilted his head upwards slightly, made eye contact with me, and frantically was reaching out his arms. And I remember reaching down, and his tiny hand gripped my index finger incredibly tightly. His whole body calmed. His crying stopped. That moment sticks with me. I didn't realize it then, but I was experiencing 6 million years of fine-tuned programming. That programs us from our... It is on. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
That programs us from our first moments with several automatic reflexes. That grip I felt, scientists call it the grasp reflex. One of the first things we do is we reach out to matter to someone. We have several reflexes that are designed to secure our first caring relationship. Think about this. From the moment you opened your eyes, your survival depended on mattering to another person. Think about this. This room would be empty if at some point we all hadn't procured mattering to another human being enough to keep us alive. That survival instinct to matter turns into the fundamental need to feel seen, heard, valued, and needed by others as we enter work and as we grow into adulthood. It never goes away. When that need is met, we experience what psychologists call mattering. Mattering is the experience of feeling significant to someone that comes from feeling valued and knowing exactly how you add value. Mattering is different than belonging or inclusion. Belonging is feeling part of a group. Inclusion is feeling like you can take an equal active role in that group. But mattering is feeling significant to members of that group. It is an interpersonally driven concept. When we experience mattering, we thrive. We're grittier, we're more motivated, we experience greater well-being. But when we experience not mattering, we languish. We either act out in desperation for the attention we're not getting, or we withdraw, as seen in trends like quiet quitting, which was the inevitable withdrawal response to a human being who feels insignificant. It is almost impossible for anything to matter to a human being who doesn't first believe that they matter. We cannot expect people to care until they feel cared for. And so when we think about what's happening right now, we are facing a mattering deficit. Imagine a newborn who reaches out and finds no one. Imagine the absolute panic. Too many of us today, I would argue, are facing that same stress of insignificance, especially at work. Let's look at the latest Gallup employee engagement data. It is at its lowest rate that it's been in a decade. This is despite, within that same decade, employee engagement becoming a $1 billion industry. There are almost 100 validated assessments to measure engagement. Yet just 30% of people, 7 out of 10 of us, if we were an organization, would indicate that we feel emotionally invested in the place where we spend 1/3 of our one waking life. We have to dig deeper, though, to see what's really going on. Let's look into that Gallup data. And you'll find that just 39% of that sample strongly agreed that someone at work cared for them as a person. How can we brush by this in an X post or a LinkedIn post? Just 30% of people indicated that someone sees and invests in their unique potential. This reinforces data from WorkHuman over the last 5 years that shows that 30% of people feel invisible or quote unquote flat out ignored in work. The most glaring symptom of our mattering deficit is loneliness. Loneliness is a symptom. 1 out of every 3 people here, look around you, feels persistently lonely, according to the American Psychiatric Association. One of the things we've gotten wrong about loneliness is that we think loneliness is about connecting more. So the advice to reduce the epidemic of loneliness has been to connect more. We're in more meetings than ever, 3 times more meeting than 2020. That's what organizations do. We're on more platforms than ever. The average US adult sends 30 to 40 text-based messages to colleagues a day, yet we're more lonely than ever. What are we missing? When you look at the reviews of the literature on what actually predicts loneliness, it is not the quantity of interactions, it is the quality of interactions. What makes a quality interactions? Researchers call it experiencing companionate love. That's not a fun term to use in business. Companionate love, what does that mean? Experiencing the behaviors of attention, of care, of affirmation, and compassion. In other words, feeling significant. The opposite of loneliness is not having more people around you. It's feeling that you matter to the people around you. This is also why just putting down our phones will not heal our disconnection. What we do when we put down our phones will heal our disconnection. And it starts with making the next person you interact with feel that they matter. Now, I want you to think about this. Think about the moment in your life or work when you most feel that you matter. Think about what's happening. Raise your hand if you're thinking about when you get your direct deposit. How about when you won Employee of the Month? How about when you got that great email detailing the hybrid work arrangements? If you're like most people that we interview and we ask what moments create a sense of mattering, you are not thinking about big actions, you're thinking about small interactions. Mattering happens in moments. Let me give you an example. One of the first studies we did was with a group of university janitors on how janitors come to understand meaning and purpose in their work. And I remember a janitor named Jane who had been at the university for 20 years. And Jane told me that during her first few months on the job, she was miserable. Her friends told her, why couldn't you have done something more with your life, Jane? Why are you just a janitor? And she internalized that. She said she clocked in, she clocked out. She said to herself, why am I just a janitor? And that was when one supervisor noticed that she was struggling. And he brought her into a break room, and he put a dictionary on the table, and he opened it to the definition of the word custodian and told her to read it out loud. And the definition in that dictionary was a person responsible for a building and everyone in it. Jane looked at me and said, that was the first time in my life that someone had showed me that I was worthy. It was a 3-minute interaction with a supervisor that's led her to be at the university for over 20 years now. She's one of the most sought-after cleaners. Everybody knows her at Colorado State University. But one moment of mattering changed everything for her. Mattering happens in moments. So how do we move from everyday interactions to creating more moments of mattering in these everyday actions? Well, our interviews with people in numerous occupations find that there are 3 major experiences that contribute to mattering. 1 is when we feel noticed, when we feel seen and heard. 2, when we feel affirmed. And 3, when we feel needed. Now, if you're looking at this and you're saying, Zach, why do you have a job? Why are you researching this stuff? This is common sense. You should be able to give the shortest spark talk in history, shorter than the donut boss thing, and say, be a good human at work and walk away. Well, what's common sense is not common practice. Our skills to see, hear, value one another have withered as we've used technology to communicate in short virtual transactions. We've been in fewer social situations to use those skills. We need a massive reskilling of leaders to care. So let's start with the first. Be a noticer. Noticing is very different than knowing somebody. You can know your best friend but not notice that they're suffering or struggling. You can know your team members but not notice that someone's feeling left out of discussions. Noticing is the deliberate act of paying attention to the details, ebbs, and flows of someone's life and offering an action to proactively show them that you remember them. Jane's supervisor noticed that she was struggling, and he took an action to show her that she mattered. One group I worked with was a big distribution center, and they had 20 teams, and all of them scored very low on employee engagement except for one. It was an outlier, so naturally I went to that team and said, what do you do here? Can you just teach everyone else to make my job easier? And I went to that team, and they all said some version of, it's our supervisor, she just gets us. We'd do anything for her. And so I asked the supervisor, I said, what do you do? And she went and rummaged in her desk, and she got out an old moleskin notebook. And she goes, on Friday mornings, I write down each of my team members' names. Next to each of their names, I write down one thing I noticed about them from last week.
That's great.
Whether they were struggling with a piece of machinery, nervous about a meeting, or whether their kid was starting baseball for the first time. On Monday mornings, I look at that notebook and I schedule a 3-minute check-in with each of them, and I say, I remember last week you told me you were nervous about that meeting. How did it go?
Killer.
And she looked at me and she goes, Zach, you know what? There's magic in being remembered.
Killer.
That's a practice. What I love about that practice is it's something she did. And we find that leaders who are great noticers do 3 things. They observe. They have some process of observing the details of other people's lives. They note what they see. Our attention is so fragmented. We have so many people around us that we often don't have the mental capacity to remember everything. So they have a process of noting what they see, and they share back what they observed. Think about who you need to see more, who you need to notice more. How can you make them feel more seen? The second thing that people need to feel that they matter is to feel affirmed. There is a big difference between affirmation and appreciation and recognition. Jane's supervisor, by showing her that dictionary definition, gave her the indisputable evidence of her significance. That's what great leaders do. They don't just tell people that they matter. They show them exactly how they matter. And that's what makes affirmation different than appreciation or recognition. Appreciation is showing general gratitude for who someone is. Recognition is showing general gratitude for what someone does. But affirmation is showing somebody how their uniqueness makes a unique difference. The specific evidence of their uniqueness. The word affirm comes from the Latin affirmare, which means to firm up or make stronger. When we give someone the evidence of their significance, we're strengthening the belief that they're significant, which leads to 2 self-beliefs that drive almost all productivity and performance outcomes in organizations: the belief that I'm worthy, self-esteem, and the belief that I'm capable, self-efficacy. How do we affirm people? There are 2 sides to affirmation. Name their unique gifts. Every human being brings to us and gives us 4 gifts every day. Their strengths, what they love and what they're good at, their purpose, the impact they make, their perspective, how they see the world, and their wisdom, what only they can teach us. And then show them how those gifts make a unique impact. One supervisor I worked with for the National Park Service, he was a facilities maintenance team supervisor. He had one practice. He had very high morale in his work team. And one practice he had was he would go around and take pictures of bridges and buildings and sidewalks that were repaired by his maintenance team. And he had a ritual. On Friday mornings, he would send an email to his team, and he'd send them the pictures, and he would say, look what you did. Thank you. He was showing them the indisputable evidence of their significance. Affirm people. Show them their impact. Remind them of their unique gifts. And then the final is to ensure people feel needed. In 1913, there was a French agricultural engineer named Max Ringelmann who did a study. He had individuals pull on a rope as hard as they could, and he attached it to a dynamometer that measured force. And then he had those individuals get in groups and pull on a rope as hard as they could, and he measured the force readings, and he added up the total force readings. Who do you think exhibited the most total force, individuals or the groups on the rope? Naturally, you say the groups.
No, it's individuals.
It was the individuals. Oh, you know,
I
yeah.
just know this effect.
It was the individuals. And why is that? It's called perceived dispensability of effort, perceived indispensability of effort. They knew that their work and their effort was indispensable. When people feel replaceable, they act replaceable. When people feel irreplaceable, they act irreplaceable. They show up and they commit. We need to feel needed. One of the biggest outcomes in our interviews with people on when they most feel like they matter is when they're called upon to help. When they're called upon to be a caretaker, when they're called upon to solve a problem, when they're relied on. Our interview subjects also recount some version of these 5 words that their leader says to them that you can use immediately right now. if it wasn't for you. If it wasn't for you, this wouldn't be possible. Again, when people feel replaceable, they act replaceable. When they feel irreplaceable, they act irreplaceable. Think of someone who you rely on right now. Think about the last time you've explicitly told them. So I want to end with one of my favorite quotes. It's actually on hospitality. It's a Navajo proverb. It says, always assume your guest is tired, cold, and hungry and act accordingly. Can you imagine the service you'd provide if you assumed that if you were in hospitality? I think we need to extend this wisdom into our leadership approach now to solve this mattering deficit. Always assume the people around you feel unseen, undervalued, and lonely, and act accordingly. Make sure they feel noticed, affirmed, and needed, starting with your next interaction. Thank you.
Oh, fabulous. All right. I teach management in this very classroom. It's a class called called Developing Managerial Skills, but its name is getting changed to Management with Purpose, which I rather like. I teach it right here, and for the second class, I teach what managers actually really do. And one year, I brought in a woman who wrote a book about management at McKinsey. Her name is Emily Field. She's just a brilliant mind. And at the end, we were doing Q&A with the students. It looked exactly like this in this moment. And she and I were riffing as the students were doing Q&A. And at one point, I forget who actually said it. I should look at the video. We're going back and forth. And one of us said to the other, well, of course, at the end of the day, management is just an act of love. And the other one of us really agreed. Yes, of course, being a manager really is an act of love. And then we kept on talking. But then at the same time, Emily and I looked out, and every hand in the room was up. Because we had mentioned the L word, okay? We had mentioned love, but you know what? I've just listened to all of these Spark Talks, and that's actually what we're talking about, is love. Okay, so Tessa talks about, I mentioned speak truth and love, about how hard it is to tell the truth from a loving place. We have fundamental difficulties with it, and Christopher spoke about so many beautiful things, but do we need to love the work we do, right? Do we love it, and why do we need to love it? Noemi talked about what it looks like when we scale organizations loving their people. What does that actually look like? VJ talked about relationship over results and making sure that that's at the forefront. Isn't relationship, and I'm talking about the kind of love that comes when you matter and you care, and that's where we landed with Zach, talking about mattering, all of those last of results. And by the way, I'm coming to ask you if you'll talk to my class about this. Look, I'm doing it publicly, so he feels obligated, okay? So this is a daring and a scary word, because it is a generationally charged word because of the idea around boundaries between what happens in work and what happens in groups, and how much love do we give and take, and so forth. But I think that is a theme I heard all the way through. I'm excited in the next stage to hear the themes other people heard, but I still hold on to that moment where people were very kind of taken aback. But almost everything I heard today, and maybe I'm biased, is about the relationships between people, which come down to caring and mattering, and maybe essentially the act of love.